Hey there. Today I want to talk to you about Mark Carney's censorship agenda and why we should all be a little bit worried about his obsession with England. Mark Carney's pretty famous or infamous, I guess, depending on your perspective, for his sort of Anglophile love of the UK. His time in England was a very high profile chapter of his career. I'll explain a little bit more about that later. But now Mark Carney, who sort of actually famously brought some corporate North American traditions to the UK, is now bringing UK traditions to Canada. And the tradition that we should be most concerned about is the UK's tradition of censorship. If you have not been paying attention to what is going on in the UK, they have become something of a poster child for censorship among Western liberal democracies. And now the Carney government has proposed some laws that emulate some of the worst parts of the UK's censorship pattern. I can't wait to tell you all about it. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Christine, and I am the litigation director for the Canadian Constitution Foundation, a legal charity that fights for fundamental freedoms in Canada. I upload regular videos about our ongoing legal cases and about other interesting developments in constitutional law in Canada. So if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, please hit like and subscribe below. It really helps my videos out a lot by boosting videos like this in the YouTube algorithm. So please subscribe, hit the like button, leave a comment, and let me know what you think. So as I said, Mark Carney has had a high profile career with a big part of it in England. He was the first non-Briton to serve as the governor of the Bank of England, where his term spanned from 2013 to 2020. And his time in London, it wasn't just famous for monetary policy. He actually became a bit of a character in the British press. He and his family lived in this £5 million home in South Hampstead, which, the tabloids were just delighted to report on. His salary of around £880,000 a year with allowances made a lot of headlines as well, because a lot of critics said that he was overpaid compared to previous governors of the Bank of England. Some critics complained that he overextended his role by speaking on issues beyond monetary policy, for example, Brexit, climate change, inequality. He was called a rock star banker, and he was compared to the previous gray-suited, understated previous Bank of England governors. And in contrast, his personality stood out. He was portrayed as bringing a North American, more informal style to this very traditional British institution, which had previously been seen as stuffy, hierarchical, and very English in its sort of cultural trappings. And he introduced a more international corporate style of management. So he did bring North American traditions to the UK. And now that he's Prime Minister of Canada, he is doing the same thing. He's bringing UK traditions to Canada. The National Post has reported that the new Prime Minister's office expects all documents to use British spelling, and staff are expected to dress in formal business attire. Now, anecdotally, I have been told that this means men are to wear black shoes only, which is a very British interpretation of formal business attire. In North America, formal business attire includes brown shoes for men, but it is so standard in London, in the financial and political circles of the city, that you do not wear brown shoes if you're in those fields. They even have an expression in London, which is never wear brown in town. So, these are some sort of superficial admirations for the UK, but Mark Carney's admiration for the UK goes a lot deeper than dress codes. As I said, in recent years, Britain has become this poster child for political censorship. The Free Speech Union reports that police make 30 arrests per day, which is 12,000 per year, for offensive online messages. Laws like the Communications Act 2003 and the Public Order Act 1986 have been wielded to silence jokes and political debate. Very famously, this September, comedy writer Graham Linham was arrested at Heathrow Airport on suspicion of violating the Public Order Act 1986 for inciting violence. He's a comedy writer. He wrote the sitcom Father Ted. He posted some jokes on X about transgender issues, and now he's been arrested for inciting violence. That is not the only time jokes have led to arrests in the UK. In 2010, there was this very famous incident in the UK where a man named Paul Chambers tweeted a joke about a flight he was supposed to be on that was canceled. And he said he was so angry he was going to blow the airport sky high. It was a joke. But he was convicted of sending a menacing communication under the Communications Act 2003. After years of appeals, the High Court finally quashed that conviction of Mr. Chambers in 2012. But there are endless examples. For example, in 2018, a Liverpool teenager posted lyrics from a rap song on Instagram that included the N-word. She was prosecuted and given a community order for posting grossly offensive content, even though her conviction ultimately was overturned on appeal. In 2019, a man named Harry Miller, who was a former police officer, posted and liked tweets critical of gender ideology. Police recorded his activity as a non-crime hate incident and visited him at work. He ultimately challenged it in court and won, and the police's actions were deemed to be a disproportionate interference with free expression. Now, these non-crime hate incidents are very, very troubling. Thousands of incidents that are not criminal have been recorded by police in England and Wales, where the speech was deemed hateful and where no crime is even required. So a mean tweet in the UK can result in a police knock on your door and a permanent record accessible by certain employers. And the result is tweets have been logged from journalists, teenage Snapchat spats have been recorded, and it is almost routine for reports of political and social commentary to be logged as non-crime hate incidents. If you want to learn more about how bad things have got in the UK, I recommend visiting the website for the UK's Free Speech Union. They are taking these issues head on and they're doing a great job. It is very disturbing, and it is very clear that the UK is well down the wrong path. And I think we should be concerned that Prime Minister Mark Carney is following them. You know, his love and admiration for England seems to include this culture of censorship. On September 19th, his government, the Carney federal government, tabled a Bill C9, which is called the Combating Hate Act. It makes 5 changes to the criminal code. Each one is troubling for free expression. So first, C9 repeals the requirement that provincial attorneys general consent to hate propaganda charges. Police can now charge on their own. And that safeguard really mattered because hate offenses are vague, subjective, and they're prone to misunderstanding and abuse. And charges are serious even if they are later dropped. And now that important guardrail that was supposed to rein in the police is now going to be removed. So we can expect to see more kinds of conduct like what we are seeing in the UK. Second, Bill C9 criminalizes willfully promoting hatred by displaying certain symbols in public. This is a form of censorship. You know, every year there's some media report about a local crank, some fringe person who has put a swastika on his porch. Every year, we are reminded in these reports that this symbol is not illegal, although it is obviously worthy of social condemnation. It has been very socially useful, though, to know who the local Nazis are. It allows us all to see who the extremists are and reject them openly. Forcing symbols underground, even hateful symbols, will only empower them, and it will actually fuel polarization. You know, foolish, racist, and repugnant opinions should be exposed openly and ridiculed. They should not be given power. And Canadians are not made safer if we don't know what people actually think. It's better for us to know who the radicals are so that we can condemn them and stay away from them. Now, today's bill C9, it lists swastikas specifically, and it also would prohibit listed terrorist symbols, which is a list created by regulation by the government, and the government decides who goes on that list. Now, right now, it's all extremist groups, and the problem is during the technical briefing, one of the first questions that was asked is why these terrorist groups, why the swastika but not the Confederate flag? That was an example given specifically. And I think once you start going down this path, you don't really know where it's going to end. And you're going to end up with many, many symbols banned, prohibited. People with quite normal opinions could see charges leveled against them, even if many of us might sympathize with the desire to ban symbols like the swastika. We're actually better off knowing who these people are so that we can ridicule them and tell our children, stay away from people like this. Another thing that C9 does is it creates a standalone hate crime offense. So if any crime is motivated by hatred, it becomes not just a sentencing factor, but a separate offense carrying up to life in prison, depending on what the offense committed was. And life in jail for speech should really shock Canadians. So 4th and 5th, C9 criminalizes intimidating or obstructing someone accessing a cultural or religious site. A lot of people said that Mark Carney was going to introduce bubble zones. I actually thought he was going to introduce a bubble zone law as well. I have a video about that. It was part of his campaign promise. But when you look back, he actually didn't say bubble zone specifically. He talked about blockading and intimidating. I actually don't have a problem with a law that prohibits blockading or intimidation. Those things are already illegal. I think we would have been better served if the police just enforced existing law rather than creating this new redundant law. But I do have some concerns that now that the police have this sort of bonus law, it might be enforced sort of arbitrarily, or it might be enforced incorrectly when people are not, in fact, blockading or intimidating. But, my biggest concern is the other portions of the bill, not really this part. This is not even really a bubble zone. I think the most alarming part of C9, though, is that it waters down the definition of hatred. So C9 proposes a statutory definition of hatred. Previously, we only had common law definitions, so definitions created by the courts when they interpreted the law. So now we have a statutory definition being proposed, and it's actually a lower standard than what the courts had proposed. The new statutory definition Carney is proposing is hatred is the emotion that involves detestation or vilification and that is stronger than disdain or dislike. That is not the current state of the law. The leading cases on hate speech, which are the cases of Keegstra and Whatcott, in those cases, the Supreme Court stressed that an element of extremeness is essential, that hatred is the most extreme manifestation of those emotions. So this extremeness component is now removed, and the overall effect of this new proposed definition is that the threshold for prosecution is being deliberately lowered. So taking all these amendments together, the purpose of C9 to me seems very obvious. The goal is to generate more charges, more prosecutions, and more convictions for government unwanted speech. Now, some of this might sound familiar because some elements of this were in a previously introduced bill, Bill C-63. The symbol element is new. And I think the statutory definition is also different from what was proposed in C-63. C-63 was a very censorious law that even Trudeau gave up on. He ended up splitting the bill and abandoning the criminal portions of it. And that bill died when Parliament was prorogued. But this Carney bill brings back those criminal portions that, in fact, even Trudeau had abandoned. The other part of C-63 that the Trudeau government did want to proceed with had to do with the creation of a digital safety commission and creating duties on social media platforms to limit exposure to what the government calls harmful content. And it also required fast takedowns, obligations on platforms for certain kinds of content. Now, it looks like that portion may also be coming back. On September 25th, Minister Stephen Guilbeault told a parliamentary committee that the government is considering bringing it back or reviving some portions of C63. They're weighing whether to reintroduce or redraft parts of it. And based on the public statements Guilbeault has made, it looks like the parts that are most likely for his department to bring back will be those obligations on platforms, social media companies, related to harmful content, which would include hate speech, as well as requirements for faster takedowns, which would could create a chilling effect on platforms. There are also free speech implications in yet another Mark Carney bill, C8. Now, C8 is a cybersecurity bill, and it's not obviously a speech bill, but it includes several features that do interact with free expression in some concerning ways. We at the Canadian Constitution Foundation have warned that C8 would allow the minister to secretly cut off a person's phone or internet service via a ministerial order. This is a serious threat to civil liberties, including free speech. These orders could remain secret indefinitely. The minister would only have to submit an annual report to Parliament about how many orders were made and whether they were reasonable, but not necessarily identify particular individuals or provide transparency. So in the context of political dissent, we have cautioned that the government might abuse these types of powers under the pretext of securing telecom systems, for instance, by restricting communications of activists or critics that they say are attempting to manipulate systems. So because telecom providers could be subject to orders or penalties, there's a risk that they might preemptively censor or restrict content to avoid legal liability. This is a classic example of a chilling effect, platforms over-filtering controversial but lawful speech. So we have explicitly at the CCF warned that the threat of secret orders to cut off individuals or degrade service could deter people from expressing dissent or criticism of government because of fear of losing connectivity. So all of this together, C9, C8, and the possible return of C63 show a comprehensive web of censorship laws being imported to Canada. You know, it's one thing to wear black shoes and insist on including the U in color. I already do that. But Canadians should refuse to import Britain's censorship culture. You know, we should fight for our right to speak freely, even when our words offend people in power. If you want to learn more about this issue, I have a column coming out about C9 in the National Post this week. If you don't feel like looking it up, I get it. It's a little annoying thing to add to your to-do list. I will email it to you. Just put your name in my email distribution list at theccf.ca/freedom updates. Okay, that's all for this update. Thanks for watching, and let's keep fighting for freedom in Canada.